Welcome. Thank you for coming, Robert.
You bet.
Yeah, it's really an honor to talk to you. I've been following your blog. I guess it started with the R Squared Energy blog like 9 years ago, wasn't it? That you started that.
It was well, it was 2005, but it really started gearing up in about 2006.
Yeah, that was always such high quality commentary. I really appreciated a lot of your articles there, and also on the oil drum. I followed you when you were on the oil drum. And now R Squared Energy blog has moved over to Energy Trends Insider.
Yeah, I was disappointed we weren't able to pull all the comments over, because there were a ton of comments on the blog, and we weren't able to pull those in. And Sam Avro, who runs Energy Trends Insider, said he's got them all, but he doesn't know how to pull them all in there. So.
But the R Squared blog, is that still up, like archived with the comments there?
It's on WordPress. I pulled it all in once, but I don't know if it got all the comments. But it is archived, but it's not. I don't think it's archived at Blogger, but I'd have to go back and look and see. I think it's totally offline at Blogger.
And you also write for Investing Daily now?
Yeah, they recruited me about 3 years ago to take over. Elliot Gue was their long-term energy writer, and he left to form his own newsletter, and they recruited me to come take over for him. And that's been an adjustment, because I'm not used to telling people specifically what to buy and what to sell, and that's a little stressful. You know, I'm patient. I'm a patient investor, so you know, if I buy something that goes down 20%, I don't sweat it too much. But if I tell somebody else, it's a lot more stressful, because they start saying, "Hey, you know, you got me into something that went down. You know, what's going on?"
Yeah, I hate to tell anybody what to do.
You're going to be accountable.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm being very unprofessional. So I'm Lauren Howe, and this is Paolo in Rome that's joining us also. We're to kind of run this interview session.
Where's he at?
I am in Italy, and no, actually, right now I am in Spain. I am from Italy, though.
Okay.
And basically, I'm just checking that the video chat works correctly, and the video and the audio. But I'm not an expert about energy and oil, so I don't know if I will participate too much. Anyway, I will just be here as a presence.
Okay. Well, Italy's my favorite country over in Europe. I've lived over in Europe 3 times, and I went to Italy a lot.
Where in Italy have you been?
Well, I've been all over Italy. I've been to Florence 3 times, and Venice 3 times, and Rome twice, and Naples, and I've been to Pompeii twice. Took my kids there. All up and down the coast. I mean, I drove from Dusseldorf, Germany, to Rome, and my boss in Germany said, "You're going to drive to Rome?" I said, "Yeah, I'm going to drive to Rome." So I drove all the way down, and we went down the Amalfi Coast, and we just spent a lot of time in Italy. It was really.
But you drove inside Rome, inside the Rome city.
Yes.
And was it
It's a nightmare.
Was it a normal experience, or was it a sort of cathartic experience?
Every vehicle is dented. I noticed this. Every vehicle is dented.
I always say to Lauren that, you know, and I am from Italy, I am from Rome, and I always say that Italy is a beautiful country, but Italians are a mess because we create all this trouble with traffic and organization. Italy is wonderful, but we have a lot of problems.
I like Florence a lot. That's probably my favorite city.
Yeah, we could just live with the art and the beautiful nature we have. But anyway, this is another topic. Maybe we will discuss it in another session.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've had a really diverse background in a lot of different fields within energy. I mean, you've lived, I guess, worked in Scotland and in Hawaii, running this holding company that evaluated alternative energy. Did you get most of those positions because people were aware of you through the R Squared articles, or?
The last 2 jobs I've had, that would probably be the case, and the Investing Daily, that was the case. When I came out of school, I went to work for Hoechst Celanese, which was a division of the German chemical giant Hoechst. It's one of the largest chemical companies in the world, and I worked for them for 7 years. Spent 2 years with them in Germany, in Dusseldorf, and then I left them to go to work for ConocoPhillips. and with ConocoPhillips, that's when I started my blog. I was working for ConocoPhillips, and I spent 2 years in Scotland. Well, not quite 2 years in Scotland with them. They sent me over to manage engineers in the North Sea. And then halfway through that assignment, a former colleague who was a business manager at Herc Celanese, he became the CEO of a company in the Netherlands, and he recruited me to be his engineering director. And so he talked me into leaving my expat assignment at ConocoPhillips, and then I moved to Arnhem in the Netherlands, and I was there for nearly 2 years. And it was out of that assignment that the guy in Hawaii who knew about my writing, and that's how he knew about me, recruited me. So that was my first job that came about because of the writing. So he brought me to Hawaii. So for the last 5 years, before now, I was there looking at projects for him. And he would send me all over the world, and I was still getting to write. I wrote my book there working for him. He said, you know, it's a slow time. If you want to write a book, go ahead. And then one of the projects that he looked at is here in Arizona. So that's where I'm at right now, is Phoenix. He sent me in here 2.5 years ago to look at a company, and I said, you know, I think they've got some promise. And so he invested, but he also embedded me here to kind of look after his investment, and they ended up just hiring me. So I work full-time for this company now. Along the way, Investing Daily came to me, and they said, we've read your writing. You seem to have a feel for the investments and the markets and so forth, and we want to know if you would be interested in replacing the guy who left. So I got 2 full-time jobs, essentially.
Yeah, and the company you're working for now, Advanced Green Innovations, do they work almost completely with gas flare utilization, or is that just one of their...
It's not how they started out. It's the bulk of what we're doing now, but it's not how they started out. They started out working on injectors for diesel engines, and the idea was that they could make an injector for a diesel engine that would get the same performance on natural gas. And so that was what they worked on for several years before I came here. And the flare gas thing came up about a year ago. Several people have approached us and said, you know, we really would like a solution to this, and so we grouped with a couple of companies and we put together a solution.
I guess to get to the main heart of what I was hoping to talk with you about, you know, I used to follow the peak oil community really closely, and you know, everything seems to have changed in the last 5 years due to hydrofracking. I mean, the impression that I get from the outside now is it's just a totally different future. That when you look at America's pretty much doubled our production of petroleum due to hydrofracking, is my understanding. And what's your general feeling on hydrofracking, not just in the United States, but as it spreads to the rest of the world?
Well, most of the rest of the world doesn't have the same sort of geology that we do. Like China has a lot of resources, but they don't have water where they need water. So, and a lot of places don't have the same sort of geology. Like California has got the Monterey Shale, but it's so folded and bended that even though there's a tremendous amount of resource there, they don't think they'll ever be able to get much out of there. And a lot of the world is like that. We've got some unique geology that, in fact, it has, you know, $100 oil does wonders for the economics of a lot of projects. And so I think that's the biggest thing that was missed in the peak oil debates, is that as prices get higher, more marginal projects become economical. And I think people underestimated how much oil there was available that could come online as the price went up. You know, I heard Jeff Rubin several years ago say it, and it crystallized in my head. He said, I think peak oil is sort of a price thing. And I said, of course it is. Of course it is. I mean, if there is not enough $20 oil in the world today to meet demand, but there's enough $100 oil to meet demand, both because demand goes down a little bit at $100 and because projects become economical at $100. So we're not at peak $100 oil yet. So I think what happens is there's a lot of projects that'll be economical at $150 or $200. So I think we will see here, we're seeing a rebalancing right now. Fracking brought on more oil than the world could absorb, and OPEC didn't cut back to take the, you know, to balance the market like we thought they would. So that crashed the price, and I think we're in the middle of rebalancing right now. And as we rebalance, I think we'll be around $60 oil. And you know, the fracking plays, how long that can go on, how much, you know, more production they can get out of there, I don't know, but I think they weren't done. I think if oil had stayed at $100, we continue to set new records for another few years before we peak and then start to decline.
But now that they are starting to perfect, or at least greatly improve the fracking technology, what's your feeling on the dollar level per barrel that they can continue at least 50% of their production?
They still
$50 a barrel.
Yeah, I think they need 60. I think if you see where they started really slashing capital expenditures, $60 they really started cutting back. And I read a lot of the quarterly earnings reports, and I think most of them are going to need about $60. There are some that can make money at lower prices, but the average company is not going to make money at $45 or $50. I think they need 60. And to really, if we had a serious demand shortfall, prices are going to go up. That's going to bring on more. They've got a lot that are drilled but unfracked. I was just up in North Dakota, and there's a lot of those up there where they drilled them, and they have to do that because of the lease. They have to have some activity, so they go and drill it, and then they cap it, and they're waiting for prices to improve a little bit before they frack it.
Is your feeling that there are other oil shale formations that may be discovered, or that they've pretty much all been discovered, and we have a general idea of what price they can be exploited at?
Yeah, I wouldn't say they've all been discovered. Remember, the Eagle Ford in Texas, the largest oil field in the U.S. right now is in the Eagle Ford in Texas, and it wasn't even discovered until 2008. So, I think there's a lot that still are to be discovered. The country probably most like the U.S. that probably will have its own revolution is Argentina. They've got a lot of shale, and they've got somewhat similar geology. China's got the most, I think, shale gas. I just think they're not in a good place over water in the locations that they have the shale.
When I look at the reserves, your proven reserves have also shot up in the last 5 or 6 years, and it looks like even at the current rates of extraction, maybe they've got another 10 years or so at the existing rates of extraction of shale oil, and that's just with the proven reserves. Is that your general impression?
If you look, I think what's going to happen is this year you will see a massive downgrading of the reserves, because reserves are a function of price. And even last year, the average price for the year was about $90, even despite the collapse in the second half of the year. So the reserves calculations that they do are based on prevailing prices, which this year are going to be $50 or $45. So that's companies are already down revising their reserves, and I think you'll see that. Country like Venezuela, for instance, if you pull up the BP statistical review and you look at their history of reserves, they tripled their reserves a few years ago, and the reason they did is because all that heavy oil that's not economical to produce at $40 was economical to produce at $100. So they got to add a whole bunch of reserves to their books. They're going to have to take those back off, and a lot of companies that have added reserves based on $90 oil are going to have to take those back off. Now, if you look at the number of years the U.S. has left on reserves, that's gone up over the years. If you look back 30 years, we had 10 years of oil left, and or 20 years of oil left, and in the interim, we've produced more oil than we thought we even had then, and now we've still got, I don't know what the latest number was, but I'll look at the BP statistical review for all that information, and it shows how reserves have evolved. I mean, reserves keep going up. As we discover more oil, we get more efficient at getting it out.
It would seem, though, that there are probably a lot of other regions in the world that eventually hydrofracking can spread to, and maybe that's going to put some kind of a cap, like $60 or $70 on the future price of oil. I mean, maybe temporarily it'll go above that, but that it, these dire predictions, which I kind of was into a little bit myself, also.
So was I. I mean, yeah.
I always kind of tended to agree with you. I thought you took a very reasonable approach, not a complete doomer, but I kind of felt about the way that you did. This hydrofracking just totally changed the game, though, it seems.
It did. And you're right. If you look at the EIA does a good job on categorizing the shale oil and gas reserves around the world, and you can see which countries have a lot of shale reserves. And I think you're right. As the U.S. is the leader. We got more and more efficient as they had to when oil prices went down. They figured out, okay, if we do more stages, if we put more sand in, they're really figuring out this for optimal development. And as it goes around to Argentina and different places, there's going to be a lot more oil come online, and you're going to have a natural headwind, as the prices try to go up. So, I don't think we're going to see oil at $150 in 5 years or 10 years. I think it's going to creep up, and then you're going to see more oil production come online, and then there's so much, and even deep water I think is going to be dead for a while because a lot of these deep water plays are not going to be economical at $60 oil, and I think we're going to get hung up and stuck at $60. We'll have some supply-demand imbalances at times. Like right now, we're setting up a supply shortfall. We're not investing in projects now that are going to be needed probably in 3 years, and that's the history of the oil industry forever. Times like this, we don't invest any money, and then demand starts to creep up, and when it becomes obvious that we have a demand shortfall, I think that's the biggest thing that happened in 2005, that where people misread that for peak oil. We had a long period of underinvestment, and Chinese demand was really growing, and we had a supply shortfall, and then a lot of companies and a lot of countries started throwing money at the problem, but there's a multi-year lag. So for a few years, it looked like peak oil.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that there's much room for additional improvements in efficiency with hydrofracking, that maybe some of the oil that's costing $60 a barrel to extract now in 5 or 10 years maybe will only cost $40 a barrel, or we've pretty much reached the maximum efficiency with hydrofracking?
I think the low-hanging fruit is gone. I mean, if I looked at a curve, it would be starting to flatten off now, I think. A lot of the oil that's $60 a barrel to produce is $60 because there's just not enough oil in that, formation. They've done a lot of experimentation with, getting the horizontal drill right in the middle of the formation, and just how many stages that they need to put in, and just how much sand. But I think most of the, they figured most of it out, I think. Then you may see some incremental improvements, but not like we've seen over the past couple of years.
And if you had to guess for the rest of the world, do you think that the United States is fairly unique in our ability to extract shale oil, or are there going to be other big regions like the U.S.?
Yeah, I don't think there's going to be anything like the U.S. They've tried it in Poland already, and the oil majors gave up, and they said, geology's not right here. So just because a country has shale deposits doesn't mean there are many factors that can impact upon their ability to get that oil out. So there are a couple of places I've looked at. I think Argentina will have a little shale boom, and I think Australia will probably have a little shale boom. China, I don't know. I mean, they got a lot of gas, but they got some challenges there. But Russia will have some. Russia will have a little boom, I think.
And in the United States now, let's say oil went back to $100 a barrel and stayed there for 5 years, and we started exploiting all of the shale oil we could. Do you have the impression that we could, even double our production of shale oil at $100 a barrel, or we're pretty much exploiting everything as quickly as we can now?
Yeah, no, we're not now, but we were. So we've until this year, we were adding oil at the fastest rate in U.S. history. In the whole 150-year history of the U.S. oil industry, the past 3 years before this year was the fastest growth period ever. So there was no sign of slowing down. In fact, it was accelerating. If you look at the curve, we were actually accelerating. So how long would that last? It would have gone on for another 4 or 5 years probably before we really started to slow down, I think. I think we could have exceeded the peak that we had in 1970. I would have thought there was no way that would ever happen 5 years ago, but the speed that we were increasing, there was showing no signs of slowing down. And if you look at all the undrilled locations, like the companies that have identified places that they can drill, there's a humongous backlog of those locations. I've read something about the Bakken. I read this 3 or 4 years ago, that they wouldn't saturate the drilling sites there until middle of the next decade. So 2023, 2024 before they thought that they would saturate the drilling sites up there.
Yeah, it really is amazing how that changed the entire perspective for world energy.
Yeah.
You've worked in a lot of alternative and renewable energy companies as well, though, and also analyzing, I guess, a lot with your last job in Hawaii.
Yep.
What are some of the interesting ones that you've worked on, and which ones do you think show most promise?
I don't think anything still competes with oil as a liquid fuel. So, well, I take that back. At $100 oil, something like palm oil, if you ignore the environmental implications there, palm oil hydrotreated to diesel, like Neste, Finland's Neste does. They're the largest producer of hydrotreated renewable diesel in the world. That can compete with $100 oil. Sugarcane ethanol can compete with $100 oil. I think corn ethanol can compete with $100 oil, but you know, there are some limitations there. You know, if you look at how much biofuels we could actually grow, it's pretty limited relative to the amount of oil we use. I think electricity is a different ballgame. I think you have many, many different ways to displace coal. So I've been very negative on coal for years. So I've been with Investing Daily 3 years last month, and I've been advising people to stay away from coal the entire time. I've been saying, you know, avoid these companies. Coal is a sunset industry. There are too many ways that coal can be competed with, and they've got tremendous headwinds. So I've been pretty positive on solar power. We've had some big solar winners. We had a big loser in Sun Edison. That's just gotten just ripped lately. Sun Edison shares, I don't know how far they're down, but it's done poorly. But we had First Solar in the portfolio at $20, and it's 65 or 70 now. So we did pretty well with that one. I think wind power will still continue to do well, but I think they're still going to need some tax credits going forward. But the liquid fuels, there's not a replacement for oil, but there's a replacement for coal. I mean, you know, natural gas is a good replacement for coal, much cleaner replacement. So, you know, you've got natural gas, you've got nuclear, you've got all the renewables. So coal is really under siege. Oil, not so much, unless electric cars really start to make some inroads into transportation.
Yeah, you keep hearing that solar is soon going to be competitive with and with oil. I mean, it has the efficiency of solar, and the costs have been coming down. The costs have been coming down. The efficiency has really been increasing in the last 10 years or so. Do you see that? I don't know if this is really your specialization, but do you see that as continuing to the point where maybe in 10 years solar will be the cheapest form of electricity?
Yeah, you know, it's funny because I saw this start to play out in Hawaii. In Hawaii, solar was already cheaper than fossil fuels because we used oil to make electricity out there. And what's happened is they've got like 15% solar penetration in some neighborhoods out there, and the utilities are throwing on the brakes because they said it's destabilizing the grid. Now, I've talked to some of the utility offline, and they said, no, it really is. It's causing us hell to try to manage this when you've got all these individual power plants coming off and on, and it really is causing us an issue. But they've made it very difficult for people in some neighborhoods out there to add solar power. So they're forcing people to do expensive studies to show that their particular project is not going to have a destabilizing effect, and it's really chilled development in some of those areas. So I think that's what you're going to see. I think even if it gets cheaper, you're going to have the utilities digging in and saying, well, slow down, and they're going to try to slow it down. But yeah, I could see. I wrote an article in 2007. The future is solar, and I said, eventually, I think most of our power will come from solar power. Eventually, we've got so many rooftops, so much unproductive area right now that can be used to collect solar energy at a much, much higher efficiency than photosynthesis that I think it's inevitable.
Do you think the efficiencies and the cost of the panels themselves are going to continue to improve, or that we're kind of leveling off now in what we can gain there?
Yeah, my own feeling is we're probably leveling off. I mean, we've had order of magnitude drop in costs in the last few years. I don't think that'll happen again, but I think we'll still see some maybe cost improvements going forward. But I think we are going to hit a limit here before long.
And are there any other technologies that you've worked with that you feel enthusiastic about or feel need to be explored more?
Well, I mean, one of the things we did out in Hawaii, and there's a power plant that it's very, very difficult to do business in Hawaii, first of all, but there's a power plant that was built out there to use eucalyptus to make power. And on the Big Island of Hawaii, the east coast is covered with eucalyptus trees that were planted for purpose. And so biomass to power, biomass combustion to power, I think is a pretty good. It's a pretty cheap way to make power, and it's it's renewable as long as you're not going cutting old growth forests to produce your power. You're using purpose grown biomass. I think that can be a good way to make power. I've seen some contrary articles on that, complaining about using biomass, but I think it's if you're taking biomass and not replanting it, I agree that's a problem. But if you've got a tree farm and that's the purpose of the tree farm is to provide biomass to the power plant, then I think that can be a pretty sustainable way to make power. The wave power and things like that, they're still very developmental. I mean, there's some that have promise, but there's some fundamental issues there that the oceans are pretty rough. It's a rough place to make power consistently because you got to design these things for terrible ocean storms, and that drives up the cost of these things. And I'm trying to think. I don't know. I really think solar wind, some biomass. I think geothermal will continue to grow a little bit, but its growth rate's pretty slow. But it's a cheap power source.
Do you see many of the utilities investing a lot in larger solar or wind projects, or are they kind of slow to catch on to that?
I think a lot of them are. I think a lot of them have either invested in or they've got power purchase agreements for companies that are putting in some of these big projects. And
when you were living in Hawaii, I guess kind of an off-topic question. How was that job? You got to pretty much travel around the world and analyze different energy projects and live in Hawaii.
Yeah, I worked for a billionaire, so I learned a lot about working for a billionaire. And one of the reasons I went to work for him, I figured, hey, I'm working for a billionaire. I'm going to do okay. And billionaires didn't get $1 billion by being generous. I mean, I've met many billionaires through this guy, and I found out even in a negotiation with me, he's always trying to get the advantage. Always. I mean, he's plotting, and so I learned a lot. I learned a lot observing him. It wasn't the job that I thought it was going to be, because originally when I went out there, we had a plant, Corin, which was a German biomass to diesel plant. So they took wood chips, they gasified them, and they converted them to diesel. That was his major investment. He invested hundreds of millions of dollars in this, and when I first came on board, I was deployed over there to try to make this thing work, and it just couldn't work economically. It was just too difficult. So the main reason I was hired went away within a couple of years of being hired, but he kept me on, and we kept looking at different projects, and it wasn't a bad job, but he would deploy me like on no notice sometimes halfway around the world, which is not all that fun. It's he deployed me on 2 days notice to Malaysia, which I'd never been to Malaysia, and he said, I need you in Malaysia day after tomorrow. Sent me to Europe a lot. I had to go. I went to Italy once for him over there. He actually was a big funder of Global Footprint Network, and they had a big conference over there that he sent me to. So I'd have to do other things for him too besides just a regular job. I helped support that investment of his in Global Footprint Network. In Hawaii itself, people always ask me about the weather. When I talk to somebody, and they'd say, "Oh, it must be nice." And we were at 2,500 feet, so it was always cold and rainy. It was the weather was not quite what you think about normal Hawaii.
Seems like it was a good learning experience, though.
It was a good learning experience. I had to be on top of so many different technologies. I took so many trips to different locations and looked at different technologies and evaluated different plants and different companies. So yeah, it was really good.
I wanted to ask you, Robert, since it seems that with this technology of hydrofracking, in general, there's not going to be peak oil very soon, and since there's going to be other technologies, like you said, wind, solar, other ways to produce energy, So people shouldn't care now. So the question is, people shouldn't care now about, or shouldn't prepare about what's going to happen, or do you still think that people could start to think about it, to think about what's going to happen when oil is going to level?
Well, I would say that we never thought we would be in this position today 10 years ago. So it's very hard to predict the future. So it could be that, fracking doesn't deliver nearly what we thought it would. My whole thing has always been, if you develop an economy based on a depleting resource, it's always a very, very dangerous thing. There are many, many things that can happen. OPEC still controls 42% of the world's oil production. So, Saudi Arabia still could bring the entire world to its knees by knocking 4 million barrels a day off the market if they chose to. So it's still a very, very dangerous situation in my view, our dependence on oil and how dependent we are on oil. And that's ignoring even all the greenhouse gas emissions. So there's still very, very many reasons in my mind that we should be trying to get off of oil and move away from oil.
But individually, what could a person do individually to protect himself from a possible crisis in 10 or 15 years or even more?
Yeah, I gave a lot of thought to that over the past few years. Now, my extended family has a lot of farmland, and so they could farm. If I had a desperate situation, I could go there and I could farm. But I thought about the big cities and cities trying to feed themselves in a world without oil or a world with oil shortages. I don't know what you could do. It's a hard question when you think about, what desperate people will do if society breaks down. I've seen it happen before in hurricanes, how quickly it can descend in absolute lawlessness. And I just would hope that you're not in that situation.
Yeah, I remember in the early days of the oil movement, there was a documentary done by Megan Quinn about Cuba and how when the Soviet Union fell apart, basically Cuba's oil supplies were cut off. It's subsidized oil, and how Cuba adjusted and amazingly well. You would think that a country like that with tens of millions of people suddenly without oil or almost without oil would just fall apart, but they adjusted and everybody.
Well, they started out at a much lower per capita oil consumption than we have. So for us, it's going to be different because we have a society built on cheap oil, and we have a lot of people who commute a long distance. So it'd be much bigger adjustment for us. Mm-hmm. I'm about to lose my voice. I've had a cold for the past couple of weeks, and my voice is getting scratchy.
This is the period. But why, Robert, did you decide to focus on energy, alternative energy, or oil? Why did you think it was interesting or important as a topic to focus on?
I don't know. I mean, I did my graduate school work on energy. I liked chemistry. I liked chemical engineering. I grew up on a farm, so I grew up around sustainable sort of practices, and the idea that we might not have enough oil to continue our way of life was of great interest to me. I actually mentioned Hubbert in my graduate thesis in 1995 in my defense, in my graduate defense. So that was 10 years before the oil drum. I was talking about Hubbert's peak and the possibility of peak oil down the road. So it's just thinking about the future and what I could contribute. That was just an interest of mine. Energy was interesting to me, and I don't know why. I mean, I grew up in Oklahoma, so I was around energy a lot. And growing up on a farm, I was around, farming animals and we made our own food, and so it was just always sort of an interesting area for me.
Yeah, I'd say you came into it right at the right time, and you really helped a lot of people. I mean, I followed you and was just so impressed with your articles over the years. I've always considered you pretty much the most logical and well-researched writer on oil issues for the last.
Well, and on the oil drum, it was frustrating at times because when you try to bring people to the big table, the rational table, people get angry because they have these ideas in their head about how the world is going to play out, and even if it's horrible, and you say it's not going to be that horrible, they get angry. I mean, I've had that happen again and again. People just would lash out when you'd say, no, I think it's going to be like this. I think it's going to be a little different.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a big community. There would be hundreds of comments on each, even the least popular articles there, and yeah, I guess the people that were most into the community tended to be the most fanatical with the humor mentality. But anyway, I really appreciate everything that you've done over the years, and it's an honor to talk to you today.
Well, thank you.
I want to ask a final question for myself. What do you think about the current model, apart from the energy sector? What do you think about the current approach that our society is taking to sustainability? What do you think? Where do you think we're heading to in terms of energy use or other sectors like economy in general? Are we risking like some doomsday scenario, or what's going to happen? Yeah, I know that it's a future prediction, so it's very.
We're risking a lot we're not sustainable by any means, and I think we have the ability to become much more sustainable, and that was always a thing that I would say is I think we have the ability to adapt a lot, but we have to have the drivers that make us adapt. As long as we have cheap gasoline and cheap oil, we're not going to adapt. We're not. We have to have something driving us, forcing us to adapt. If I had to start raising some of my own food, which I've generally done, but I can't here in Arizona, I can't do that very well. But if I had to, I could do it. I could start, and people in their yards could raise food. So there are things that could be done, but there has to be some driver. And right now, there's no drivers. With cheap oil and cheap gasoline and cheap food, there's really no drivers towards sustainability.
Yeah, I've always felt like in the developed world, just our lawns waste so much money, and our large cars, we've got a lot of room to adjust. It was the third world that I don't think the average person realizes how fortunate we are that hydrofracking came along and kind of has saved. If it weren't for hydrofracking, and if the original appearance of how peak oil was headed had continued, I mean, the third world would be in a unbelievable state. And
the funny thing, I used to believe when I first got into this debate that as oil prices went up, the developing countries would be priced out of the market. And what actually happened was their demand didn't have any inflection point as oil prices went to $100. If you graph demand from developing world, there's no change at all. As oil went to $50 and $70 and $100, they didn't change their demand growth at all. The West, demand in the West went down. It went down in the U.S. and it went down in Europe. And when you think about it, we had a lot more fat to cut. And a little bit of oil for them goes a long ways. I saw, when I was in India, I saw 7 people riding around on a moped. When you think about how much a little bit of oil, so you got many, many people consuming just a little bit more, and it has a big impact on their lives. I finally reasoned that's the deal. So $100 oil doesn't impact them as much because it's not a big burden on their pocketbook because it's a very small portion of their their expenditures. But for us, it's a lot more. So we cut back. So I started thinking that you're going to see even at $200 oil, maybe they're still going. I only use 20 cents of oil. I can use 40 now, but it's still I can get to a job halfway across town that I would have to walk to. So it's still of great value to them. It gets them a lot. The 7 people on a moped was an epiphany for me. I said, okay, so I calculated the amount of oil that I thought they were using relative to a single person driving an SUV across the town. They're getting a lot more bang out of their oil than we are, so it's worth more. $100 oil, we go, I don't have to take that trip maybe, but they're going, no, I'd like to use a little more because I'd like to put another person on this moped and charge them all to haul them across town.
Is there anything else that you want to talk about, or I mean, you can send us. I think I've got the links to all of your the Investing Daily and Energy Trends Insider that we'll put up with the video. And if there's anything you want us to edit out, we usually make like a short version of the video and then a long version and put both up.
Okay. No, just let me know when you got it up, and I'll link to it.
Oh, great. Okay. Is there anything else that you're working on or wanted to mention in particular?
I don't think so. You know, I am working on the flare gas stuff, and I'm also working on some methanol production from flare gas. That is the next phase of what we're doing is you know, trying to make fuel out of. Right now, it's the flare gas that's being flared, so we don't want to flare that. We want to take that, capture it, and use it for energy. But then, if we could convert it into a liquid fuel on site, that's even better. So that's the next phase of what I'm working on. And I'm probably going to the Permian Basin. Our third unit has been deployed to the Permian Basin. Our first one went to the Eagle Ford, our second one was in the Bakken, and our third one's gone to the Permian Basin, and I'm probably going there to see that one in a week or two.
And those are units that actually convert the flare gas into liquid fuel, or
no? Those convert it into power. So they take the flare gas. You know, flare gas is really rich. It has liquids, and it's derating the whole flare gas stream into a consistent methane stream, which can then be used to run a genset.
Yeah, it was interesting. I read that you were working on that, and I had thought 30 years ago that there was some kind of regulation that you weren't allowed to flare much gas.
So did I, actually. I got in an argument with somebody about this about 5 or 6 years ago, because I thought that too. I thought, well, nobody's flaring anyway, but no, yeah, there's a lot of flaring going on in some places.
That was interesting for me to learn.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you.
Are there any environmental concerns about hydrofracking? When I was researching about it in Google, I saw that there were people protesting against it because it could be potentially dangerous for water contamination. Is it something serious or?
Not really. There's more hype there than anything. There's potential there, but typically the fracked zones are thousands of feet below the aquifers. But the wells still have to go through the aquifer. So you've got a well that's drilled and it's got cement and it's got pipe that goes through an aquifer. There have been cases where that well casing has leaked and gotten some stuff into the aquifer. But we've had like 1 million frack jobs in the United States, and we've been fracking in the United States since the 50s. So if fracking really was contaminating water, we wouldn't have any clean water anywhere right now. So the issue is largely overblown, but like always, I mean, accidents can happen. You are putting fluids in the ground. They are going through the aquifer. They can be spilled. They can leak. But the frack zone itself, there are no cases. In fact, like I said, there are cases where a well has leaked, but the fracked zone, there are no known cases of a fracked zone leaking water into an aquifer, because it's just thousands of feet, and those fractures are not that long. They can't traverse thousands of feet to get into an aquifer.
I asked because it seemed like there were some people who were concerned about this, protesting against it.
I can tell you a more serious issue is whether they cause earthquakes, because that is there's more evidence to indicate that disposal of water from frack jobs has caused earthquakes. The #1 state in the United States now for earthquakes is Oklahoma, my home state, and it's because of the enormous increase in fracking there. And they have tied that to those earthquakes to fracking, or at least the water disposal after the fracking.
But there's never been a really significant earthquake, right? These are all below 5.0 magnitude, or
they're in that region. I mean, they've caused some damage, but not like California, San Francisco type earthquakes, but you know, they've caused damage. They've messed up houses and stuff, and the frequency has gone up. You know, I don't know, order of magnitude, more than order of magnitude, so that, you know, people don't think of Oklahoma as a major earthquake state, but it's now the #1 earthquake state in the country.
So there is some effect.
There is some effect.
Thank you again, Robert. It's really an honor that you've been able to spend some time with us.
You bet. Thanks for having me, and we'll do it again sometime.